But I chose to be here this morning because Tynah has always been, for me, one of the heroes in the fintech ecosystem with MoneyMatiX. You're right, we met when we launched FinTech Scotland back in 2018. You were one of the first ones to knock on our door, virtual door, and say, well, we're here. We want to change the way the financial system works. And that was quite lucky because that's what we set out to do when we created FinTech Scotland. So our motto is creating innovation through collaboration to drive financial inclusion. So that's what we're trying to do with FinTech Scotland. And having companies like MoneyMatiX and so many others, we've got 240 fintech businesses in the ecosystem, and a lot of them are trying to solve issues. And really, fintech for good is the word that comes to mind when I think about the ecosystem we've got. So I won't say too much more, just to say thank you for being here today. If you are not engaged with FinTech Scotland, very easy to do. TSB is a strategic partner of ours, so we're very often in the building. We run an innovation lab with TSB, so there's lots of activities. Feel free to come and find me afterwards, or come to our website, go online and follow us, and we'll be happy to engage all the time. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mikhail, for that. So my name's Tynah Matembe. I'm the founder of MoneyMatiX. As I said, we've been going since 2018. And when we started MoneyMatiX, it was out of, first of all, sheer shock at how the first world, because the UK is pitched to you when you're coming from Uganda or Africa as the first world. So everything is meant to be amazing and already working, right? And I come from a middle-class background, so I wasn't poor. I wasn't moving here in any capacity except that I was, trying to do something different, right? And it was so difficult to settle in, and I was so shocked at how difficult it was. I was coming from a cash-based economy, which meant that everything was cash first. And here I was in a place where I was being penalized for having cash. We couldn't bank for over 3 months. We just could not open a bank account, and eventually got really frustrated. Entered a bank, which I will not name to be kind. Entered the bank, got really frustrated, and my husband just plonks cash on the table. And we got the police called on us because we had so much cash. And so now it became an anti-money laundering investigation. And that was the first time in my life that I had not been recognized for having money. Where I was coming from, I would put cash on the table and have a drink until I decided to close the bar. So this was really strange, right? And the intricacies continued, that you don't have a referral, you have no reference, your reputation is worth nothing. My background is in law, so I have a degree in law. I had played at the highest ranks in the country I was coming from, and I came here to go to the bottom of the ranks. And I just remember thinking two things. One, when I was coming here, everyone back home thought I was crazy. They were like, what are you doing? Are you in debt? Should we be solving a problem? You have such a good life here. So psychologically, I was trying to prove them wrong. And then I'm in a physical place where they were right. Then I had children, another complication, and I was like, Lord, help me if they have to go through what I've gone through. And that's literally why MoneyMatiX was set up, was if I have had to go through this, my children shouldn't have to go through it. Certainly nobody else should have to go through it. And so MoneyMatiX has been a journey of that, trying to make untold stories come to life, try to show that there is so many use cases. There's so many use cases, but everyone seems to paint you with the same brush. So trying to highlight those differences and then trying to provide education to help. Because the sad reality is that actually all these things can be solved if we have the right information and the right education, or if we know how to fight for our rights. So if you go to a place and you don't get the right services, there's ways to go about getting recourse, right? But if you don't know that, or you're coming from a culture where that's not the case, you don't know what you don't know. So education is at the core of everything we do. We run several programs. We do work with youth because that's where this started. So this weekend, my team, forgive us because we are really knackered. We have just had a youth money camp. So we are quite frazzled. We're with young people for 3 days, again, doing the same, providing financial education quite early on, providing a space where they can think and be ambitious over and above what their reality may seem like. It's such a key thing of what we do. During COVID, we found another iteration of the problem is that people who have moved here and don't feel welcome are likely to live in a temporary way. And so they don't make decisions that are going to benefit them financially in the UK. And so on paper, they present as if they don't have money, but actually it's because they've not been included, and therefore they're making decisions in a different way. So a big part of our work is that, educating them, but also educating services and systems around that. I'm so happy to be doing this. Any chance to talk about money, any chance to talk about the issues is an opportunity to move the dial forward, because the first step to anything is conversation, right? And one thing I've learned is that all of us make mistakes. Just preparing this event was very interesting. And I remember the title we had for this was, in our title, we had a word around equality. And Michael, who's one of our partners at Radiant and Brighter, phoned me up and said, actually, no, what you're doing is not trying to get equality across the line. You're trying to get equity, because equity is getting a seat at the table and being able to have a conversation with people, be at the same playing field. Here I am since 2018 doing this, and I'm getting a phone call telling me off, right? And it's just that ability to stand up and say, right, I will get some stuff wrong, but I am trying to get this right. And it's okay for you not to know everything about the topic. I don't know everything about the topic. So I'm really, really excited about today. We are going to do a few things. We're going to have a keynote address from Johnny Timpson OBE. Thank you so much for making the trip. Really interested and keen to listen to what you're saying. And then I'm going to have a lived experience conversation, just to, again, tease out those journeys, to just see what things can be. Then we'll open it up to a discussion, because it shouldn't just be people up here talking. And this is a safe space. We just pan out conversations, ask anything you don't understand, or what you think on the topics we'll have discussed, and anything else that's not been discussed. And then we'll do a little exercise. We'll do a small exercise, take you back to the money camp that we've just been at. So you have some Jenga to play with, trying to do some design pieces. And then we'll mix and mingle, because I think a big part of doing anything is conversation, getting conversations to get relationships matter. Being able to pick up the phone and say, Mikhail, we need an event like this, comes from the ability to just sit down over a cup of coffee and chat. So really, really looking forward to that. I will now introduce our keynote. So Johnny, thank you so much for coming. Really, really awesome. As soon as we contacted Johnny, he was like, yes, I'm doing this. He's on the same page. And so we are so thankful for that. And Johnny is one of the UK's leading commentators on financial access, inclusion, and resilience. So he's an advocate, and clearly being here today is just evidence of that. He has an extensive insurance and banking sector experience, and is a financial inclusion commissioner. He's a former Cabinet Office and DWP Finance Services Sector Ambassador. Johnny holds ambassador roles with the Surviving Economic Abuse Charity and Age Irrelevance. He's a trustee of the Codwell Children's Charity. He holds advisory roles with the Vocational Rehabilitation Association UK, University of Edinburgh Business School, where we've just been this weekend, so really cool, and also Aging at Work program and the Protection Distributors Group. So quite a diverse range of understanding on the topic, because inclusion, as we know, is so wide, right? But you just need to decide what lens you're going to go in and try to make a difference. And Johnny is definitely doing that. So welcome, Johnny. Thank you so much for being with us. And we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, everybody. And when you get a call from Tynah, what else can you do but come along? But personally, on behalf of the Financial Inclusion Commission and the Building Resilient Households Group, thank you, Tynah and MoneyMatiX and Michael and all of your colleagues at FinTech Scotland for inviting me along today. And do you know, it's really important. I guess we couldn't have asked for a better place to come together than Henry Duncan House, because 200 years ago, he was tackling financial resilience issues. He was trying to improve financial inclusion, financial well-being, and he did that by advocating mutual banking solutions. I have to say, 200 years on, if he saw the issues that we are facing today, by the way, this is some research that we've, as the Financial Inclusion Commission, have just done with the University of Birmingham Financial Services team. This is to inform the government as they're making a financial inclusion strategy call, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But if Henry Duncan had seen this 200 years on, he'd be absolutely appalled that we are facing exactly the same issues today. Henry Duncan today would not be a mutual savings bank champion. Believe me, he would be a FinTech founder, champion, and advocate. Now, as a financial inclusion advocate myself, disability charity trustee, an all-regulated sector vulnerability tech chair, former Cabinet Office disability ambassador, and a member of the Prime Minister's Dementia Champion Group. And one of the many people, consumers, clients, labellers as you like, with a protected characteristic who is living and working and caring in Scotland and Britain today. Let me share some of the kind of, because I spoke to consumers around the country in Belfast and East Kilbride and Wales to inform this. Let me just share the learning that I took for that. You know, that if we in financial services think for 1 minute that competition is working for consumers, if we in financial services think that fair value is working for consumers, if we think that access to products and services is working for consumers, I have to tell you, we have to think on. That view that's held by a number of people in the ivory towers of financial institutions across the UK, I have to say by a raft of parliamentarians in both houses of Parliament, and by the people within the Treasury and other government functions. That view, frankly, that is but a notion. A notion. You know, when you look at the needs of people of different ethnicity, different age, different gender, people with disabilities, people with caring responsibilities, people in debt, in negative equity, people in precarious employment, renters, people who lack contractual capability. And I mentioned those various different, I could go on, but I mentioned those different types of consumer because we do have, we're now a year and a bit into the new consumer duty regulation. We're now there for new book and now for closed book business. Financial institutions, retail financial institutions across the land need to understand who the customers that they serve are. They need to understand who their target market is. And equally those they serve. Now, tackling the financial inclusion, the poverty premium, the ethnicity premium, has become a crucial need in our aging society that needs to increasingly work and care for far longer than we did before. In our nation where employment, rental tenancy for many is precarious, where income volatility, as I mentioned, negative budgets, anxiety around your credit score is the norm, where people are paying higher charges and fees simply due to their ethnicity or their level of household income. Well, that's the reality for many. And where access to trusted financial information, guidance, and advice is increasingly becoming an option for the few, certainly on a face-to-face basis. These issues, compounded by, as Tynah mentioned earlier on, the lack of financial capability, and importantly, the digital exclusion problems that we are facing today. And the dial is not moving on digital exclusion, no matter what some people may share. That's the reality from the consumers I've spoken to across the UK. But what is financial inclusion? For many organisations and politicians who champion financial inclusion, they've got a blinkered, siloed view. As a person standing before you today with visible and non-visible disabilities, who works with charities, consumer groups, and a variety of universities, I've witnessed financial exclusion in the raw. People who locked out of the system, who should be getting support, or if they are getting support, are paying significantly more for it. Importantly, people entitled to welfare benefits, grants, and social tariff schemes, who, for whom those benefits would really make a difference if only they knew about them. And it's important that we take a holistic approach to financial inclusion and make sure that people are able to access the services, benefits, grants, social task schemes that will benefit them, irrespective of the differences or the cocktail characteristics that we all present with. I hold that financial inclusion is a 21st century right. Every one of us should have access to the appropriate products and services that we need. They should be affordable, particularly where they're essential services, be it bank accounts, as Tynah had problems with, loans, insurance, investments, welfare benefits. Now that means breaking down the barriers that prevent people having access, particularly marginalised groups. It's important that they're able to fully participate in our economy and enjoy the same understanding, value, service, support, and outcomes as everyone else. I chair the Building Resilient Households Group, and I'm a member of the Financial Inclusion Commission. And I really welcome the comments that Rachel Reeve and Tulip Sadiq made back in the end of January when they presented their plan for financial services that committed the government to having a Treasury minister, let me stress, minister-led Financial Inclusion Commission, and equally focusing effort in improving financial resilience. I think it's important that when the Treasury convene that independent, so that Treasury-led Financial Inclusion Commission, that it's not the usual suspects in financial institutions and trade bodies that are on it, but we need people like Tynah on that. We need different faces and different voices that represent the people and communities across this land, irrespective of who they are and how old they are. I also welcomed 2 weeks ago Nico Raffi, the Chief Executive of the FCA, basically making the point that financial inclusion and growth, the growth agenda that government are talking about, are not mutually exclusive. And he basically also made the point you cannot have financial inclusion without digital inclusion. And a change of mindset, it really is needed to move the dial. We need a different conversation about risk and innovation, particularly in relation to AI. We should not be scared of AI. We should basically embrace AI and FinTech for good and ensure that it serves the many and not the few. And there's a big risk of that. And I say that all the more so because the dial has equally not moved in consumer financial capability. And if you're old like me, you'll have seen a lot of change in the last 25 years and a lot of risk transfer to consumers of all ages. Firstly, from the government in terms of quite a significant welfare reform agenda that kicked off actually with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, let alone the previous Labour, the previous Conservative administration. From employers in relation to a transfer from defined benefit pension schemes to defined contribution. And one of the downsides of the independent pension commission led by Lord Turner at the beginning of the millennium was the fact it switched the pension industry focus on how big is your pension pot, rather than actually what level of income do you need to sustainably live and have a good lifestyle for the rest of your life. So we need to talk about income, not pot sizes. The industry like to talk about pot sizes because it's good behavioral economic stuff, isn't it? People do like, big numbers. Actually, it's the income that results from that is the key issue. But equally, the other kind of big, I guess, risk transfer is that from the increasing change within financial services itself, and they need to broaden the regulatory perimeter, and that's compounded, I guess, by technological advance and particularly around machine learning and AI. Now, but equally, whilst the big regulatory piece that's in front of us all at the minute, as mentioned, is the consumer duty. But bear in mind that consumer duty, be it looking at open book or closed book business, looks at the consumers that we serve today. It's not talking to the consumers that are either unserved or underserved by financial services. So we need, the big rethink, a big refocus needs to also focus on them. And I urge everyone in this room in FinTech Scotland to really champion doing just that. But we also need to realize that the traditional financial services market in itself cannot always come up with products and services that meet consumers' needs. Some of those needs will need collective social solutions. Some of those needs, as called out by the Office of Business Responsibility 2 weeks ago, it was missed because everyone was talking about who buys Keir Starmer's suits. But the OBR 2 weeks ago basically said there are some issues that the UK financial services marketplace does not have the capacity to meet any need, catastrophic need that arises. And there are issues where we do need to have a government insurer of last resort solution, as you maybe see in some of in the states where people in hurricane belt states cannot normally get flood and types of insurance. So there's a government solution over there. But we have this issue in the UK at the minute that when we need a social solution for an issue, and I think we may well do for the poverty premium. You speak to the FCA and they'll tell you, well, we're the FCA, but we don't do social policy. And you go talk to the Treasury. I go talk to the Treasury and they say, but we don't do social policy. We'll go and talk to the regulator. So we need someone, a foot in the ball moment, as part of this Rachel Reeves rethink of financial inclusion, because we need to have a mechanism for calling for a social solution or a government insurer of last resort solution. So I hope in this morning's discussion that we can really start to take forward some of these things that I talked about. And please, don't underestimate for one single second the importance of the job that you do. Because I've highlighted just some of the plethora of unmet consumer needs that are out there now. Now, we don't have enough face-to-face bankers, enough face-to-face mortgage brokers, insurance brokers, wealth managers, debt counsellors to meet that need from the many. And the only way that we can do that is making sure that people have the digital skills, the services, the support, the routes to information to enable them to make informed decisions about the products and services that they buy. So, if heroes don't always wear capes, but FinTech Scotland, you are my heroes. So please rise to the challenge and push government to think about some of these issues, not just government in Westminster, but government here in Edinburgh too. Just before I close, if you check the FT this morning, you will see that the Financial Inclusion Commission have published a public letter calling on Rachel Reeves as Chancellor to now deliver on that 24th of January commitment to having an independent Financial Inclusion Commission. So if you can do me one favour, please get onto social media and say, Rachel Reeves, get on with it. And please make sure that as part of that the Financial Inclusion Commission you pull together, that it's not the usual voices that are there. We want people who really do represent communities across this country. And we want a FinTech for good voice within that commission. And on that note, thank you. Now, I've given Tynah these slides. We've not published this research yet. We're not going to do that until we meet Tulip Steak at the end of the month. But please, feel free, Tynah, to share these stats with everyone in the room. And if that helps you, with your own campaigning, great.
Thank you so much. That was awesome and leads us very nicely into the next bit. You've basically done my work for me. I really, really believe that we need people, different people who have walked different paths to be heard if anything's going to change. And that's on that basis that I have this next session coming up. It's a lived experience session. I have to please come up Pheona Matovu, who is our partner. She works with Radiant and Brighter. She's a doctor to be. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me up here. I wanted to start by sharing a brief story. But before that, I wanted to be clear that there are so many types of marginalized people. That is something we have to be very clear about, because when products are being designed, you can get overburdened with the assumption that there's 100 people that I need to design for. But usually it's just a small increment in one area that will work for everyone. I wanted to share a story around designing a financial education program for a community. So we got a piece of work and we're designing this project for a community. I'm like, I know this, I've lived this stuff. I know what I'm talking about. And I designed the program, and day one comes, and the coaches I put in place were men. It was a Muslim women group. And I'm not Muslim, right? So you think you're living the marginalization, and you're an embodiment of it, and you have all these experiences, and then you turn up and you have male coaches to deliver a class for females. And that's when I realized that learning does not end. So I share this vulnerably and honestly, just to let you know that even if you're living in the day-to-day, you're constantly learning. And the more we are able to share about these differences and talk about those differences, the easier it will be. Pheona, I'm so happy for you to join me up here.
Thank you for having me.
Pheona works in the anti-racism space. We have to be clear that there are so many types of marginalized groups when we are designing our products. We may not tackle each and every one of them, but it's very important to highlight them. There's racial and ethnic minorities, which is, I mean, I fit the bill. And so that's where I started to play, and that's where my lived experience comes from, as I shared with you, moving to the UK and becoming vulnerable when I was coming from a place of, a better place, right? There's women and gender minorities, as we know. I fit that bill as well. There's low income and economically disadvantaged people. There's people with disabilities. There is youth and the elderly. There's religious minorities. We tend to forget this, and the story I shared with you is absolutely not even forgetting it. You just don't know about it. It's like, what are you talking about? Men are not allowed to give you a session, So there's some nuances that we need to be respectful of and understand. There's rural and isolated communities in the UK. Very interesting to me. I was like, well, I thought this was where it's at. What's going on? But there is rural communities. In fact, I'm part of a business community where a friend of mine has to travel 3.5 hours to get to the nearest internet point. So they, as a community, they have to get together, and they had to buy a satellite dish. They have no internet somewhere up north. And then interestingly, recently, I did some work with people who have criminal records, and they are excluded. They are very excluded. There's migrant workers who are undocumented. There's so many nuances. And I think it's understanding that I am only able, this is the lens that I'm able to solve for. This is the one thing that I can do, and I think it will fit across 5 or 6 areas. So let me do that first. Let me take that first step. So Pheona, I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I wanted to start off by asking you to share your own journey, because you have a very powerful story yourself. And so I'd like to hear from you. Just tell us a bit about your personal experiences and, the work you do.
You sure you want to hear about my personal experiences in these 30 minutes? Thank you for having me, Tynah, and thank you for having us. Our work with you is always valued, and it's precious to be sitting here with you. Our journey, so my husband and boss is sitting right there, I have to say. Here, he's the boss here, not everywhere. But yeah, so our work and our journey as Radiant and Brighter started when we came to Scotland. I've lived in the UK 26 years now, and I lived in London 10. We moved here 16 years ago to Scotland, and I never knew anything remotely about racialization all of my life, including the 10 years in London, until I came to Scotland. And I lived that. This is what you were saying, we're learning every day. I lived the life. I was racialized, but never thought about it until I came to Scotland, and it became very clear that a lot of who we were was not included within the systems and structures and processes that are in place. So I'll come back to our story. But before I get to that, I'll tell you where we are now as Radiant and Brighter. we started off supporting people to integrate in the communities, because we found that there were people who were traveling miles to go to just finding a place to buy stuff because they didn't realize they had a supermarket around the corner because they are new within the system. And we started with that and then realized there were so many people that didn't speak English. We come from an English-speaking country where we speak English in school and everything. Believe it or not, English is not my mother tongue, but it's my first language. It's what I spoke first, it's what we communicated in. I won't be mentioning colonialism, or I just did, but moving away from that, we then...
Sorry, could you speak a bit louder?
Oh, I need to speak louder. Okay, I'll shout a bit. So then we started supporting people in integration and then realized people needed to learn English. And they were going to colleges and being taught English, but in a way that you're taught when you're greeting somebody, you say, how do you do? Who says, how do you do? Nobody, unless you're in a certain setting. So we started to teach people, what do you do when you're speaking language and things like that. And then we realized so many people just wanted to find work. And I'll come back to that story, but we started to support people into employment and then came to a stage where it was very clear. We worked with Marks and Spencer's, in fact, in 2016, I always get the dates wrong, but somewhere around 2016. We worked with Marks and Spencer's and put through 90 candidates because Marks and Spencer's was looking to diversify their workforce, but they did not have people that were applying, and if they applied, they didn't stay. So we devised a program with them and put through 90 candidates over 18 months. But that exposed us to the understanding that regardless of how much we did, putting people into employment, supporting them to upskill, they got into spaces and they were not, their services, their skill sets, their understanding was not applied within those spaces. So we moved from just supporting people into upskilling to supporting organizations to think about their spaces. What are they creating? And is the creation relevant to the diversification that we now have here in Scotland? We're not very diverse, but the demographics are changing and will be changing increasingly. I believe the last census showed that by 2030, 1 in 4 children will be from minoritized backgrounds. So we are changing and we are growing. And so we started to do that. And then we started to support people who are saying, you know what, I can't find work. And even if I find work, I'm excluded and discriminated. So what I want to do now is start a business. So we started to tell people how we'd started our own business. And that brings me back to why we started our business. We found ourselves in a space where we were not allowed to work or access public funds because we had applied and we had been denied a visa, and it went downhill from there. Once we got denied a visa, going through the whole process of appealing, finding a lawyer and everything, it took us 5 years before the Home Office could respond to our application once we'd got it wrong. They did not respond. They said nothing, went silent for 5 years between 2007 and 2012. We had children. No organization would provide any support because we didn't tick a box. Not financial, not milk, not food, nothing. And yet we are in a country that prides itself of human rights and looking after children. And we had children. I was pregnant when we got through that situation with our 3rd child. And I think that kind of educated us. And in 2012, when we got our leave to remain, we thought we're going to find work, but we applied and we could not find work. And that's why we set up Radiant and Brighter. And so our work now sits a lot around systemic change. And Tynah likes to say, I'm already a doctor, no pressure, of course. But I now come to a stage where I realize we need to educate ourselves. And I've gone back to university to do a doctorate in anti-racism, looking at systemic change and how we understand the spaces we are creating. And I would argue you cannot be fully inclusive until you have understood anti-racism. And in FinTech, I would say we need that even more. We were poor. I had never seen poverty like that until I got to the UK. We weren't exorbitantly rich, but I wasn't poor where I came from. And when we got here, it just got difficult. And I got into a state that we did not understand. We were in debt because we couldn't pay council tax. But we couldn't pay council tax because we were not allowed to work. We weren't allowed anything. And we took 8 years trying to get out of debt. And then you start from that stage and you're expected to kind of move up, but we're not starting from the same point. That's where your equity statement begins to make sense, because I'm not starting from the same level as everybody else. I've had 26 years, 16 of which have been a completely different journey. So yeah, that's a bit about what we do.
So many points you've touched on there. Thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. It's just, and it's terrifying when you're in that situation. Also, no one understands you. You're being, you've talked about not being able to work in 2012 because there's this thing called the gap in the CV.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have a gap in the CV because life's been lifing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't account for it. And it's the same in entrepreneurship. I remember joining an accelerator and doing all the things that everyone is supposed to be doing. You're just different. You're not going to raise money the same way other people are raising. You don't have a friends and family round. And that's looking strange. And so you've been going since 2018, but then your funding journey is slower than people who are coming up and setting up in 6 months. But guess what? You've now passed the place of startup. Therefore, the funding that's meant for startups is not working for you. But hey, you've pivoted 4 or 5 times by this point.
Yep.
There's so many of these layers that don't work. Something I wanted to pick up on with your relationship in trying to place people in employability is if you don't have someone on the inside who is speaking the language or who understands that lived experience, even no matter how well-intended the program is or the designing is, you are not going to solve the problem because internally there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
So we need people with lived experience as part of the process.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to touch on, and then I want to hear your experiences on how we can shape that understanding for broader economic good, is research.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's when you're looking at systems being designed for marginalized people and the budgets being given out, we are then told, oh, we did engage with people of color. We engage with marginalized women. We engage with these people. But the engagement has stopped at research, at just the research point. We have not been included in the actual designing of the product. So if you're building a fintech product and you sat down with me and asked me a series of 30 questions, and you're building a lending product that's supposed to help people who are not documented, for example, but you've not sat down with me from start to finish, the research is just research, right?
Yeah.
What's your experience with that? But also, I wanted you to end on a note of what can be done systemically to solve those issues.
So, in terms of research, there is a lot of work done to ask us the questions. Tell us where your barriers are. Tell us what your problems are. And those issues that are researched are often not embedded in the design of the services that are then churned out. And that's very problematic because it does not allow for us to produce something that will reach the very people we have asked what their barriers are. Why? Because when we ask the questions, we then sit back and then we have tables and rooms where the people with lived experience are not sitting. And so when the design stage starts, it starts off by an interpretation that is not with the same lens as the research that they have in front of them. We all come from a certain perspective. If I am understanding of the Scottish culture and you put me in the Ugandan culture, I may not necessarily decode some of the things that are said or some of the ways that people think. So you cannot design for people without them in the room, and that happens a lot. So we need to see a lot more than that. But let me tell you how this has been embedded in our systems, in the financial systems. I hope you won't be jumping out of your seat, and please hold your seats comfortably. because I'm now going to talk about slave trade. The first time we see the selling and buying is with slave trade. That's the first time we see the selling and buying, and we are buying people. Now, the challenge with that is that that understanding of buying and selling of goods, people, is what was then fed into what we have now as the capitalist state. It is what was fed into the industrial era that led to what we had from the plantations and the people that worked in the plantations, feeding what we now have as our capitalist states. Now, that design model where people work for you, people that you see as less, people that are not valued, contributing to a society that takes and continues to take, is the design model that we will have within and embedded in the systems and the products and services that we design if we don't think differently about it. Now, that means we have to learn and unlearn. And that brings me to what should we do? I think what we need to do, first of all, is educate ourselves. We are always learning. So I did a piece of research for my master's in research. And my research was in looking at how anti-racism is practiced within organizations. But one of the things that came out was the importance of understanding failure. We have failed organizations, we have failed systems, we've failed certain communities consistently. So we need to start from understanding the generative effects of failure. How do we see failure? Can we use that to learn from it? But a lot of times, organizations shy away from acknowledging and addressing failure. So where we have failed, how can we change that? How can we move from that? And that requires a level of humility, a level of education, and absolutely bringing people like yourselves that understand the challenges, but also understand the solutions to the table to be part of the design system and process.
Wow, that's heavy. I want to touch on two final points before we finish this session. Thank you so much for sharing so candidly and honestly. When we're not in the rooms, when those lived experiences are not in the space, you completely miss the point. So when you're designing a fintech product, for example, I did a design session with an organization, a big organization, who are trying to solve digital inclusion. And their understanding was that people of color have no access to devices. And I thought, that is crazy. Digital inclusion or digital exclusion for a person of color does not mean they don't have a device. First of all, if they're a migrant, they have family in another country. So 100%, they have a phone, they need to communicate. Exclusion for them is the barriers of fingerprint technology, being able to access bank accounts online when you don't have documentation, so many other things. You have a basic bank account that doesn't allow you to transact online. That is what digital exclusion looks like in practice. But if you just ask me a question about exclusion on a piece of paper and I've not been part of the design, I don't know that. Then the other thing, that the point you've raised there is, if you don't know the makeup of the people, you think that they're not significant. But I always try to go into organizations and say, if you gave these people a certain amount of education or you designed your product more inclusively, this is how much it's going to add to your bottom line. First of all, we found that when you design a product that's more accessible, it's accessible across the board. You design for disability, even the people who are able are, get the benefit out of that. So it's trying to help people understand that even if it's a small population of people you're designing for, it helps your bottom line across the board. So thank you so much for that. And it leads, yes, or Jonathan, you wanted to ask something?
No, I just wanted to echo something that Fiona said.
Please speak louder.
Yeah, I'm a community person, and I like working with people, and hearing your story actually resonates very well with me. One thing I wanted to say, recently I attended an event, and when we talk about, exclusion, diversity, equity, the education is a very important aspect for everyone. But one thing that I picked out from the last event I attended was an example of JP Morgan's. They were awarded the best employers of the year for diverse communities. And I think their CEO stood up and said one thing that will stick with me. said, it doesn't matter how many times we speak about these issues, we need to be more practical. He gave an example. In this year alone, he employed over 30 Black professionals in his organization. And that's not even joking. So to me, we can talk and talk, but it has to start with organizations. First of all, if you have a board, think about how representative your board is. What's the diversity of your board? And if we cannot practically do these things, sometimes it makes the journey very difficult.
100%. And actually on the point of boards as well, it's there's normally a call out for diverse boards, and then you don't put a framework in place to make the people included when they come in. Again, embracing the difference of where they're coming from and making it a welcoming space. You ends up excluding people as well. So it's a maze. Accountability is really important.
Absolutely. I suppose one other thing that I will say, which contains 4 things, when we're thinking about inclusivity, what you've said is you've talked about the way in which we try and include individuals, and that is great. But when we're thinking about exclusion, discrimination, and racialization, we have to think about it in 4 aspects. First, the structures that you have in place. If you have a structure in place that says, if you come from a cash economy, you cannot be part and parcel of what we are doing here. If you have never had debt, we cannot lend to you. That's structural exclusion. That means your systems are just excluding people without even thinking or considering their perspective. That is a particular perspective that is excluding. Then there is the cultural element, where there is that assumption that because that people do not have devices, they are poor. They come from a poor background. Because they come from Africa, therefore they're poor. And if they come to us, we want to make sure that we understand. Just today, as I was sat there, I just got a message from somebody who bought a house, and as they bought the house, they found themselves in a situation where the people they bought from are going to, I'm trying not to mention names, but the house was bought from a public sector agency and now is going to be demolished, but they don't know which way to turn. They have no services to turn to. They're writing to me, and I'm not a financial person. I'm not in that sector. I don't even know which way to turn myself. But culturally, we assume that people of a particular background or look a certain way are going to come to us because they need help, because they're poor. But they're actually coming to be part and parcel of the economy, of the ecosystem. So culturally, we're not allowing people in because we see them as poor. Institutionally, we consistently design services that exclude, and we fail to reach the people that we need to reach, or design services that will work with these people. So we fail them consistently with the services that we design. And I challenge you to find any institution that is not institutionally racist. I'll leave that one there. Personally, it's where then we start to have those elements of individually bringing people into the space. But once you bring people into the space, don't just bring them in. What do you have in your space that allows them to flourish and bring the expertise to the table without them feeling that they cannot speak because they will be problematized if they bring something that is different to everybody else? So those 4 elements have to be taken into consideration.
That's very powerful, very powerful. And actually, I've had so many people having conversations around behaving differently in different spaces. So you join a board, right? And they've looked for diversity, and they've invited you on their board. You get there and you become mousy. You can't speak. You don't know why. You can't quite point it out, but it's because it's not welcomed you, or you've been frowned upon in a way. It's how do you prepare the land for diversity is important. How do you prepare your designing of any financial product or service, or to make sure that it's safe for the people coming in. Thank you so much, Pheona.
Thank
This
you.
leads very, very nicely into what Michael is going to share with us next. He's going to talk about AI and data and eliminating bias in financial products.
Between us, I've never been so overwhelmed and underwhelmed by a technology before. If I look at other sectors, it's advanced medicine, it's advanced space, it's advanced energy by a factor of 10 to 15, if depending on who you ask. I look at the financial sector, and I'm going to make a difference here between back office and front office. So between what's happening with investment, for example, where AI is already making a lot of positive changes. And I'm going to speak about the experience of people, so banks, retail, where all we've seen is chatbots. Or, in another word, a machine telling you something that a human could tell you as well, so replacing jobs. So that's a bit underwhelming. If this new technology that's changing the world is just going to be here to tell you where to find a document online.
Can you hear us? Okay.
It's, it's a bit underwhelming. I'd love to see a lot more. The good news is we have amazing innovators in Scotland, in the UK, and around the world that are looking at new ways of doing things using AI. And let's not go into the debate of is it AI or machine learning, or let's speak about AI as a global concept. There's a lot of great innovation. Now, before speaking about AI, first of all, two things. We need to speak about data.
Yes.
Because if you build AI on bad data, then you're going to get bad AI. We have many examples of that. The second thing to mention is AI is not going to solve everything, right? So AI and fairness is a nice topic. It's a nice title. But AI on its own is not going to solve fairness in the workplace or fairness when it comes to financial inclusion. It's going to be one of the tools that's available, definitely not the tool. But just going back to data for a second and data quality, I think, and that's where companies like TSB or others are in a very lucky place when it comes to AI, which is they have centuries of data. Unfortunately, the issue is that data was biased from the start because as per the previous chat, we live in a financial sector that was built by white people, privileged people, for people with money and not people without money. So therefore, if you use that data, you're likely to get a very biased AI. So I'll offer you what I think is the solution. Well, the road to a solution, but by no means the only one. And that's what I'd like to discuss with everyone. First of all, I think we need better data. And what that means is, unfortunately, well, what it doesn't mean is programming the data. And that's my personal view. There's a lot of people who are for programming things, like even distributed ledger technology. We're looking at CBDCs and whether it could be programmed. I'm against that. In any intervention from any state organization, for me, is dangerous.
I agree.
Especially in models, because then you lose control. However, I think we've got new technologies now, like synthetic data, that can create better data using real behavior of people. And I think that's one of the answers. The second thing for me is more data. We've seen with open banking already a lot of new innovation coming through. For those on the table, if you don't know what open banking is basically giving customer back the control over their financial data and allowing them to share that with innovators to create new solutions, in a sense. With open banking, and I was actually here about a month ago with Adam, and we listened to a company called MyArc. I like to give them a bit of profile because they're doing some really good things using email data, using household data, use energy data, all of that to help people manage their money better. And I think that's one of the solutions that will drive fairness, because to play devil's advocate, and when I say devil, I mean the large financial institutions advocate, they're not devil. They're doing what they can. With the data that's available today, for someone who comes with a thin credit file, they would be crazy to give that person money just based on that data. And I'm not sure they could be blamed for that. They are a risk to take. When you lend money, you want the money back, right? However, there is other data out there that could tell them a different story. Well, that person has been amazing at paying back every time they've borrowed money. That person is actually engaged with this association, this company. That means they have a bit of money. You know, there's loads of data out there you could tap into to look at. Actually, it's more than just the bank account. They display behaviors that actually say they are good with money. So I think better data, more data is the answer, not programming it. And also where I think we should, and that maybe for a different concept, it could take the whole hour, but explainability is a topic that I think we need to be careful with. It's going to be very hard as model develop in the future to explain, because the better the AI is getting, the worse in a way it is at explaining why it's making a decision. We see the appearance of black boxes all over the place. Or so if we focus solely on that, either we're going to slow down the progress of AI, or we're going to create the wrong behaviors. I think it's about using AI when and as it's relevant, not for everything. Definitely not replacing humans. When we look at financial advice, for example, I think it's important to have the human, but using AI in the right way, and just making sure that we don't build on the foundations that were laid 200 years ago when issues around racism and inclusion were at the highest, and making sure that we build on better foundations. I think we've got the capacity today to build on new foundations, and that's where FinTech as a movement, because I believe FinTech is a movement, it's not a technology, as a real place to play. Not on its own. I think cryptocurrency, distributed ledger technology, AI, open finance, all coming together. We've got a great recipe here. We need a good cook. We need some money. We need some more ingredients, some more data. And then we'll get there. I'm quite optimistic as a person generally, but I'm optimistic about the future, I think, for fairness. It's not moving fast enough, and I know it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. But I think, you know, with everyone in the room here, we've got large financial institutions, we've got amazing association, we've got representation from the Commission, we've got all the right people around the table to create a movement that could drive efficiency and fairness.
Totally. Thank you so much.
No problem. And I'd love to speak with you further and with everyone around.
Yes, for sure.
That huge table is big round table.
Yes. I think one thing I wanted to talk about that is 100%, I agree. Programming is not the way to go. Synthetic data can definitely help us with a starting point.
Yep.
I keep banging on about accountability, because if we're talking about moving forward, moving the dial forward, we need accountability in the data. What does good data look like? Because good data, what that means to me is different from what it means to you. So just even understanding the perimeters we're working to and having a framework is great. I love the sandbox idea, where you have a space that you can go in and test things and look at things going wrong and start sort of creating a measurement tool that can help.
Yeah.
I'll open it up for anyone that would like to add on. Yes, Johnny?
Tynah, I do share your optimism. I think one of the concerns that I have, I'd already asked the I'd asked the FCA when they were reviewing the senior manager regime, to have a senior manager function basically in relation to data quality, because you're absolutely right. You know, if we put bad data in, you get bad results out.
Yeah.
And I think a good example of that actually is what's happening currently with credit scoring data, which we all know has been an issue for a long time. And when you have, given the fact that it's real time, and we have some sections of society that are more prone, because of the workings of our welfare system, to maybe get sanctioned and others. You know, that knocks onto their credit score, which immediately locks them into poverty premium. And the use of credit scores, particularly within the insurance pricing data, has long concerned me. And it's actually quite interesting. We haven't really taken the learning from US states. Insurance in the US is regulated at state level rather than federal level. But state after state in the US now is now basically saying to insurers, do not have credit scoring data within your insurance pricing algorithms, because minority groups are being punished as a result of having to pay more. And I think we need to stop admiring that problem and address it pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And I think everyone would recognize that the credit bureau have not evolved as they should have had. I don't want to name anyone, their data is very poor. It's out of date. Even with people that are not discriminated against, for the general UK population, the data is bad. I think we've seen, so if you look at Equifax or the other bureaus, they've been acquiring fintechs recently. And they're trying to look at new models. Now, the danger is, again, you're going to take those companies, very innovative company, and they're going to work on bad data. And they're going to be inside companies where innovation is stifled. There's other solutions out there, and what I'm encouraged, and it's not because they're here in the room or we're here in their building, but TSB, they've got a fantastic innovation call at the minute around using open banking and open finance data to look at not just credit decisioning, but all the other decisions they take within the bank. And we need more people doing the same thing, which is let's change the way we do things.
Grace, I told you about coming and not being able to open an account for 3 months. And it was just so mind-boggling to me. We had a bank account where we were coming from with a big bank, which I'll not name, but a big bank that had a brand back where I was coming from and here. And I'm like, I have bank statements that can be verified across. Why is that not possible? Why are you not transporting my profile from my passport from where I'm coming from to here? Why are you putting me in a box? And it's so easy to solve. But then there's the regulation in place. There's people who don't understand why the regulation was put in place. There's so many layers. The onion needs so much peeling by the time you get to the point that actually, if someone has a bank account from abroad and they're moving to this country, just import it, or do it at the point of visa requirement or whatever it is. But those small points don't seem to come across, which is where synthetic data would come in to create that best practice, so to speak. You talked about the best practices in the US. We don't seem to do that well in the UK at all. I was part of a cohort that went out to Silicon Valley. My goodness, it's been a year already, maybe even more. But we went over to Silicon Valley, and the thinking is just so big. They're just so innovative, even from a government level, that change happens quicker. But the loopholes of getting change done in the UK seems to be much slower. Yes. Yes, please. Yes, you need a microphone. Please speak louder, because I think it's an internal mic for some reason.
Thank you. I don't have a very loud voice, unfortunately, but I'll try. And I take your point around data and AI and the challenges with the current credit bureau. So for those of you that don't know, we're floating, as Mikhail would know, we're starting up a credit bureau called Univery. And one of the challenges we're seeing, one of the things we're looking to focus on is exclusion. But regulatory definition of exclusion, when we started, we realized it doesn't quite work, because when you define exclusion, you go for the key thing, the basic things, your low income, migrants, vulnerability, those would be your 7-8 categories. When we then started training our models, if we pick an example of a student who's considered vulnerable, a young person who's a student, naturally would be low income, considered and naturally excluded. But you have a student who's from a privileged background. You also have another student whose parents generations were migrants. You've got a student who probably lives, the parents are within a benefit system. And you've got a student who probably might be in a privileged background, but he has his mobile phone, but his behavior is not good at paying his mobile phone. So within one category alone, you've got those differences. And what the model started showing us, what AI started showing us, was some of those salient characteristics that we couldn't pick out. This was the same if most of you are used to Netflix AI model. What Netflix AI model would do is, as you watch a movie, it begins to fine tune it. Now, you might say, I like a comedy movie, or I like an action movie, but it then realizes, well, you like an action movie, but you like medieval movies that sit within maybe UK within this particular time, and maybe it has some Viking twist. And if someone had asked you from the start, you would say, in a questionnaire, you would say you like an action movie. What you wouldn't know yourself or define yourself is you like an action movie with medieval twist, with Viking. And that's the power of AI. At least that's what we're beginning to experience, so that when fintechs then start recommending products, which is what we're looking to do, it will target the individual and the individual's exclusion. Clearly, you have to also make sure the AI itself is not biased. Naturally, we've seen biased AI, so you need to try and fix that. But I think you're right. I think data is the way to go. Yeah, we don't have great data just now, but we could start with it. But also for organizations to just realize we've not gotten it right. And so what's the data telling us that we don't know?
Spot on. Thank you so much for sharing that.
It's
Pheona?
quite interesting listening to what he was saying there, because that, sorry, thanks. This whole idea of synthetic data sets. The question is, what's the foundation for it? Because what we are doing at the moment is we are trying to use AI to create an individual energy usage profile of every single fridge in your house, wherever they may be across the globe. So we have a foundation on which we are building the AI model. When you then start talking about generating synthetic data, I'm a bit trying to work it out in my head. What would be the actual foundation for that synthetic data? Because if it's already going to have a very weak foundation, for argument's sake, then the synthetic data that will be generated out of it eventually is going to be weak and potentially biased as well. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by...
Well, there's different type of synthetic data, and you're right, that's a good point. Synthetic data can be as bad as the data you start with.
Sure.
I'd invite you to have a chat with a company called Smart Data Foundry. They're doing some great work at the minute. They're looking at agents, so creating virtual agent where they can recreate data or create data that will be the 3 or 5 years worth of data, of behavioral data, of fake agents that replicate behaviors seen in a real data set. So the good thing is there's no link to the real data set. So from a security perspective, you couldn't take that data and even use AI to say, well, that was that person. You lose a tiny bit of, therefore, I guess, truth in it. There's a few assumptions you have to make because you're not using real data. There is a bit of programmability in it, but only using research papers. So they're not using bank data like that. They will use ONC data or other type data to replicate the real world, really. And then they will simulate the behaviors of agents for 3-5 years, and that will give you a set of data that can actually be worked on as if real. So they're probably better placed than me to speak about the algorithm behind it, but it's working quite well. And they've done some great work with the FCA on the APP fraud. They're doing some great work with some of the large banks as well. And they're doing some work right now with councils in a post-pandemic world where they've been able to, using synthetic data, identify areas of concern in councils in Western Bartonshire and other regions in the UK. So without naming the actual citizen, being able to identify areas where help is required. So
in the next few years, what is that likely to be like?
well, I think you'll see AI creating AI data, which is scary. That's not a place where we may want to be. But hopefully, with the help of the ICO and other regulators, we'll make sure that the financial sector doesn't fall for that and focuses more on data is one thing, but on the journey, building better products. AI can help to a point with that, but I don't think it can solve the issue. So, yeah.
And I think that's where collaboration comes in, because there's a role for regulators, there's a role for the likes of the Smart Data Foundry, and then there's also the role of the accountability structure.
Yeah.
So creating frameworks like that, which is why, as I say, I really love the sandbox idea, because you're creating a framework based on what's working well, and you're in real time looking at what's not working. We've run out of time, so we'll just take one last you had your hand up, Pheona, so just that last question, and then we'll wrap this up.
I'll try and use 30 seconds. I think you did answer the question anyway, but I was gonna say, you're talking about data, and I'm a qualitative researcher, but we're aware of the pitfalls of quantitative research and big data.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to do a piece of research myself using quantitative data, and I ditched it. And I felt so disappointed in myself because I didn't have enough to work with in order to generate what I needed to generate, because the quantitative research model and the work that I was doing could not do the calculations I needed to do. And so what I wanted to ask is what kind of good practice you're seeing, and whether there is a real push to do to work with organizations like MoneyMatiX and others, not just to reach out to the communities, but to develop and design and be part of the delivery and the work that is going on within FinTech Scotland and the current ecosystem, because we know that it has to be intentional to bring that data in. Otherwise, we're consistently excluding the data that will inform us to reach the very people that we are saying we are not engaging with.
Yeah. So, two answers to your question about what we're doing to engage. We created a citizen group where we've got representatives of organizations like Citizen Advice Bureau and Money and Pension Services, all coming around the table, telling us what the issues are. So they represent the customers, they represent the people. They're telling us what the problems are, and we look for new innovation and new technology. And that's how a company called Invest a few years ago was able to then get onboarded by NatWest, but also used by other customer-based organization by using open banking data to identify when people were entitled to benefits. Seems crazy, but there's tens of billions of unclaimed benefits every year that people are entitled to, but they don't know they are. So by just entering there a few details in the tool, people were, on average, I think it was £5,000 a year to unlock that before going into debt. So that's a massive number for a lot of people in the UK just by using a tool. So that was one example of how we've engaged. So through citizen groups. In terms of data, I would really encourage you to, and there's no affiliations anymore with Smart Data Foundry, but to go to them with your problem. They are looking for problems. They are not for profit, and they want case studies and they want problem statements like the one you've just mentioned. I cannot do research. I cannot get data for my research. They would love to work on something like that, to look at, okay, can we recreate data, synthetic data, agents data? Can we use AI to do that to help you with your research? I think I'm very happy to make an introductions afterwards because that's the type of problem they really like.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. I wanted to just add finally before, just in line with that is we really need a lot of case studies that tackle this problem. We launched a manifesto in April.
Yes.
And we quickly realized, Mary, didn't we, that the definition of financial inclusion is absolutely different to everyone. So in terms of our manifesto, we're all about like progressively moving the dial in terms of inclusion specifically to the characteristics I listed earlier. And then there are big organizations that are set up and they're looking at it through just one lens, right? So you need to be very clear on the tin, what accountability looks like, what that framework looks like, and then calling out all these different use cases will be a big step forward.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.
Yes, been brilliant.